All right, well, delighted to welcome everybody to this event. I'm Neil Forbes, and I'm co-host with my colleague sitting the other side of the table, Elena Gaura. Essentially, we are just going to have a few words from Emily, who is going to, from our Media and External Affairs unit, who is just going to set the scene in terms of housekeeping, and then we'll do some more formal introductions after that. So, Emily, just help us with what the event is, how it's going to be structured.
Thank you, Neil. So welcome everybody. Really happy for you to be here today. Really looking forward to the event. So just a quick overview, as Neil said. So this event is being recorded for post-publication purposes. So you should have a notification to say that in the main chat as well. Where you're comfortable to do so, it's great to keep your camera on to keep the event as interactive as possible, being though we are over Zoom. Please also kindly keep your microphone on mute throughout the event where speakers are presenting. And please also make use of the chat function throughout the event as well. It's a really good way to interact and pose questions, particularly during the interactive session and the closing debate. So I think that's it from me. So I'll hand back over to Neil. Thank you.
Thanks, Emily. Okay, so we are here at Coventry University, and this is, in a sense, the first such event that we have put on, both for colleagues around and across the university, and also clearly, invited a wider audience. And we're delighted if you're joining us from outside the university, so to speak. So we would try and keep to time. And you can see the agenda there in front of you. We would very much welcome as much participation and engagement and discussion from everybody, particularly, of course, in the latter part of the meeting. We're delighted that you're able to join us. Apart from anything else, we are, in a sense, trying to develop our understanding and our approach to transdisciplinarity. So we really would like to have this event regarded as a sort of mutual learning session. We are certainly not here to putting ourselves forward as, in a sense, excellent exponents of transdisciplinarity, but it's something which we really want to develop and to be an important structure and framework for our research activity. So we're delighted to have a couple of external guests, Samantha and Philip, who will be giving us the benefit of their expertise and their experience, based in Leeds and Cambridge, respectively. Elena, I mentioned earlier, and myself, we both head up two new institutes, which are key aspects of how we structure things now in the university. And we're also joined in the next slide by two colleagues who are going to talk about their own projects, but in Coventry University, based in Coventry University, Narinder and Sylvester, and also from our doctoral college by Heather. So when it comes to their sessions, we're very grateful if they say a little bit more about themselves and their role in today's event. So let me then just say a few words about why we are putting on this event. I said that we're not, of course, we would like to think that we have always done transdisciplinarity, but two things have happened for Coventry University. Just checking the chat there. I hope everyone can hear me.
The sound is okay, Neil.
Yeah. Okay. Good. So yes. So two things have happened for Coventry in tandem, so to speak. The first is that we restructured research started to restructure research about 18 months or even 2 years ago, and clearly that was an opportunity to think about some of our most important principles and values behind what we were doing. And the second thing is that we have contributed our new research strategy to a revision of the corporate plan, and the corporate plan, which in a sense was coming to an end point this year, is now, the new plan is now about to be published, and that will take us forward for the next decade or so. So the new research strategy, a very important component part, a pillar in the new corporate plan. So I said that Elena and I head up institutes. My institute is Creative Cultures. Elena?
Mathematical, physical, and computational sciences, which is a nice blend of computer science and engineering, throwing complexity science.
Thank you, Elena. And we have, I think, leaving aside, one of the institutes is really focused very much on global education, but we have another 7 institutes focused on sort of thematically on various aspects of research. So you can begin to see why in this new structure we clearly must avoid, given that we have these very large institutes, that we do not fall into the trap of not talking and speaking to each other. So clearly, building high-performance teams across the institutes is going to be a key enabler of delivering the research strategy. And in that respect, we think of transdisciplinarity as being a most important part of what the teams are doing. And of course, we're all fully aware of how, in a sense, the external world, the external environment, outside of what happens inside universities, is asking for us to provide solutions to the societal challenges that we are all facing. And in that respect, of course, we can't hope to solve problems with a kind of single disciplinary approach. It is very much a transdisciplinary approach that we need to take. And we can see that if, for example, if you just simply look at global challenges, if you look at the way in which the UKRI and research councils are moving, they are working increasingly in a cross-research council manner. The last point, of course, is that we are very familiar with things such as the REF, the importance of impact, and we are waiting keenly to see the results of the REF and how our impact case studies have done, the impact our research has delivered, but this whole need to boost the research is going to become ever more important, regardless of what happens to future REFs. And in that regard, we need to think about how we build into the research that we are doing ever-increasing engagement with our external stakeholders. And by stakeholders, of course, we think of a very wide range of different types of organisations, institutions, agencies, charities, and associations. So stakeholder, the term used in that very wide-ranging sense. So I think that's all I need to say at this stage, and I will now, I think, hand over to Heather. And Heather, would you like to introduce your session?
Thanks very much, Neil. Yes, I'm delighted to introduce my session. So we're going to do something sort of a little bit different, but in the spirit, as Neil said, of mutual learning. When we started planning this event, the first person I thought of that we would be wanting to be inviting would be Samantha from the University of Leeds. Some of you know that that's where I used to work. We used to work closely together. Samantha is head of Interdisciplinary Research at the University of Leeds. We'll go into more detail. We'll pick her brains about what that actually means in a bit. The other reason we're not going to PowerPoint overload you. We're just going to show you some nice pictures and some words to keep us on track. I think what I also wanted to do, almost model in the spirit of the skills and capabilities you need to do transdisciplinary research, is that means that we're going to have a conversation with each other. We've got some questions to start with that we thought about would be interesting for us to discuss, and model that skill set of being able to listen to somebody else, to display curiosity about what somebody else does, and that spirit of trust that everybody's put in me to trust me that Samantha and I's conversation is going to work this afternoon. Just before we go on to that, if we can have, so that was the sheep slide. Next one, please. There we go. So we're not sheep, by the way, Samantha and I, but it was the best picture I could find. I just thought I'd share with you, just before we started our conversation, this is literally, I've just thought, food for thought. So this is a little way of thinking about the difference between multidisciplinarity, interdisciplinarity and transdisciplinarity. It's a contested space. What does transdisciplinarity mean? And we may want to go on and think about that more in the discussion sessions. But if we could bring up the next slide. So this is taken from a paper by Choi and Pak, which is quite interesting, as in Pak Choi, that my colleague Tanvir, who's working on transdisciplinarity with me, showed me the other day. And it was just like, this makes sense to me. So multidisciplinarity, you could think about like a salad. It's where different foods come together, but they maintain a distinct identity. The next one is interdisciplinarity. So you could think about that like a stew. So the components are married to create something different, but they're still identifiable. We can still see the parts of the stew when we sit down to eat it. And then finally, and this is what really sang to me, is transdisciplinarity, is the ingredients are combined and the final product is completely new and the ingredients are absolutely nearly indistinguishable. And that just really sang out to me as a way of thinking about transdisciplinarity. Again, we can discuss it later on. So just before we go to the next slide, I was just going to say, Samantha, I don't think I've ever heard of somebody who's another job title like yours, head of interdisciplinary research. What does it actually mean?
Thank you, Heather. Well, it's a title I never tire of introducing myself using because it still excites me. And I know Heather's keeping us to time, which is good because I could go on about this for a long time. So my job at the University of Leeds is to work with academics. We're starting a new institute now, actually, which is called a Frontiers Institute. And it's basically to bring people together to think about different ways of doing research, different types of research. It's sparking those conversations, it's facilitating those conversations, and it's also working with UKRI to lobby them to look at funding in this sort of space. And at the moment, I'm just recruiting a team of people to work with me in this new space.
Thank you. And I suppose is it worth mentioning? So you don't actually do research, you merely... No,
I'm the lucky person that sits in the corner and watches two or three people from very different disciplines going, you know what we could do, and that is my job. So yes, I normally work with early career researchers, but well, actually it's across the piece at the moment, and I'm also working with some of our doctoral training partnerships to develop some approaches for PhD students and postdoctoral researchers.
Thank you. So that gives an idea that there's somebody just sitting in a space almost making those connections happen. So what I forgot to say at the start was what I was hoping to do is tease out of Samantha's brains ideas not only for Coventry University but for people joining us from around the world, I understand, this afternoon, about how can we make transdisciplinary research happen at the individual level and at the institutional level. So that's going to be our inspiration. So your challenge, if you're sitting there, and I know I can see current Coventry University PGRs and ECRs in the audience, is to think about what Samantha is saying. And then when you're looking at the next set of presentations from everybody else is, right, how does that apply? How have they done what Samantha was talking about? So that's sort of your homework that you're going to be doing to keep along the way. So the next slide is the first question. So you might be asking yourself, am I ready for, and TDR is our common abbreviation for transdisciplinary research. Samantha, what skills and capabilities do you think researchers need to be able to develop or possess to be able to engage with transdisciplinary research?
Well, Heather, you've actually commented on a couple of the things that I would have said, and listening is I think probably number one. And as Neil said in his introduction, that we need to be listening to the external world for inspiration for the wicked challenges that bring disciplines together. And I have a word of caution on this. I think that sometimes when we have, certainly I'm just going to talk about my experience, when we have external people coming to talk to us, there is a tendency in perhaps more senior colleagues, forgive me, I'm sure that's not anybody on this call, who might hear something that triggers something in their life's work and their life's research, and they will possibly see that as a way of the solution, of developing the solution to this. But I would urge everybody to listen, when you're listening and working with others, to just kind of almost leave your research at the door and just be the researcher that you are. I'll explain what I mean. I was working with a group of people, and we had somebody in physics, and he was working with a group of people that were addressing a problem. And he said to me, I can't work it out. I don't know how to get my research on magnets into this conversation, because they were playing with ideas around interdisciplinarity, transdisciplinarity. And anyway, I said, well, just, stick with it, keep your ears open. And in the lunch queue, because we were at an event when we were all together, he said, I've had my eureka moment. And I just came as a physicist and listened to the problem. So my research is always there and my training is always there, but I came as a physicist, and now I found a way to integrate my ideas into this project. So listening is a big one. I think it's really important to have respect for one another's research and disciplines. Yeah, I think sometimes it's quite easy to put people in boxes if you don't understand where they're coming from, and the kind of outputs they have as researchers. Very different if you're in fine art from if you're in chemical biology. So it's about having understanding how other people address the issues that they're addressing, what the outputs are and what the differences are. And it is really about respect. And then the last one, and you did also mention this, Heather, the people I think are most successful at that are the relentlessly curious. So I know lots of people at lots of stages who literally can't sit next to somebody without saying, so what is it you do? Oh, how do you do that? And why do you do that? And it's those people who are constantly opening and questioning and curious about other people's worlds that are arguably most successful in this way.
Thank you. So that leads very nicely into the next slide, which are curiously titled, so looking for unicorns. This is part of, we were talking about, again, the next stage. How do you get people talking on a sort of transdisciplinary level, Samantha? You gave me some ideas. Yeah,
so, well, something I'm quite keen to do is to bring in external speakers, typically to talk about something that everybody in the room isn't familiar with, and that's quite hard, obviously, when you're working with a breadth of disciplines. But if you pick something that a lot of people are familiar with, then they'll do a deep dive into their own understanding. So I'm always on the lookout for people, and I went to an event last year where I heard a woman speak I've actually got her book here, and she's talking about sand and how sand is the most overused natural resource we have. And it takes 25,000 years to make a grain of sand, but it's being massively overused and mined and trafficked. There's sand mafia. There's a whole thing about sand, not something we cover at Leeds. So bringing Kieran in and saying, do you know what, this is a problem, and then inviting people from all different disciplines to have those conversations, and that can be the sweet spot to find a eureka moment when you bring in somebody very different.
Exactly. So, and that sort of then leads on. So we've almost like breaking.
Somebody needs to mute, I think.
If you could mute, if you're not Heather or Samantha, that would be great. So moving on, so that was interesting. So we get people talking, and maybe it's something that nobody knows much about, so to prevent people going into their deep dives. And something else we talked about was methodology, and again, you had a way of addressing that issue.
Yes, I've seen lots of events where people do lightning talks on their disciplines in the sort of lively expectation that their research discipline, their research area will spark an idea, and sometimes it does. But sometimes those research areas are so far removed from other people's experience that they really struggle to find a link. And I was running an event, and it just occurred to me one day to do something slightly different, because what most of you have in common who are doing research is you collect some form of data, you have a reason to collect that data, you collect it in a certain way, and then you have an output. And I think that sometimes the methods, it's not strictly true, and if you're in arts and humanities, that I know that data is a different way of looking at it, but I think it can be a leveler. So I will typically pair up two people from very different research areas and ask them to go away and either in a Zoom room or a paired walk or something, and ask them to ask each other, so why do you collect the data you collect? How do you collect it? And what do you do with it? And I can honestly say I've never run this where two people haven't found some sort of a sweet spot between the data, between what they do. So it might be listening to people, they collect data in a certain way, and suddenly in a different discipline you say, well, that's really interesting because we collect similar data, but we do it, in a different way. And this can create that. I think for me, that is where the genuine novelty as well can arise. And it's a leveler. It's a leveler because if you're a qualified researcher, if you're trained to do research, then you will have all been through some training of a similar way. And I think that can really help across the disciplines, this sort of leveler around methods and sometimes equipment as well. I ask people to share the types of equipment that they might use, because again, that can create novelty. And I don't know whether you want me to give an example of that, Heather.
Yes, please.
So just briefly, I run a program at Leeds, which I will talk about afterwards if there's time. And we had somebody doing satellite imaging of weather and rain patterns in clouds. And they were sat over lunch talking to two people who were doing ecology. And Neely was saying, oh, I send up satellites and I look at the raindrops in clouds and use that for my research. And one of the other ones said, raindrops, are those like kind of, I don't know, small versions of a bee? Because she's an ecologist. And he said, yes, I've got loads of noise in my data, so I just ditch it all. And these two ecologists were like, oh my goodness, hold on a minute. And they had their eureka moment. And we primed that idea. It was a small idea, and it turned into a huge grant for NERC. And it was just that conversation.
And that is an example that I will share in the chat, because there's a really nice YouTube video. And so that was £5,000 turned into £800,000, and I believe it's carried on being funded by the Gates Foundation.
Yeah,
that's correct. So I said we've got a couple of minutes left, and that almost moves me on to the last slide, which is, you did talk about the programme, and I did manage to find some fire, Samantha, but just to give us a very quick overview of Crucible and the sort of ways you bring people together in groups to do this sort of work.
yeah. So this is what really lit my fire for being the sort of looking in at the beautiful world of research and how disciplines can come together. I work with Nesta, which is National Endowment for Science, Technology and the Arts. And we co-designed a program called Crucible, which runs at a number of universities. And I've facilitated it a number. We do it at Leeds. And this is a program where we typically bring 30 people together over 3 sessions. And it's about becoming interdisciplinary, and we do lots of breaking down barriers, and we have external speakers, and we talk about the challenges for things like REF, and how do you if you're an early career researcher, what are the challenges to becoming interdisciplinarity, because you've got to do the deep dive before you look across. And that program builds up a network of people that I believe then I've seeded for the university. So 30 people each time who really get this and are real advocates for this. So yeah, it's something I'm very passionate about. And we've just done a Zoom one, which allowed us to include people from Bangladesh and Zimbabwe. And we've just done it for the World Health Organization. But as you can see, I can talk at length about that. So I will try and stop there, Heather.
Thank you very much, Samantha. And I think we are spot on time. So again, your challenge audience is then to see some of those things that we've talked about, themes or opportunities in the next set of presentations. And I believe, am I handing back to Neil?
Thank you very much, Heather, and thanks awfully, Samantha, for those insights into barriers, challenges, and ways to overcome. Very, very insightful. Thank you. And we can pick up, I'm sure, on some of this later on in the discussion. So it's my great pleasure to introduce next Philip. And Philip, we're more or less keeping to time, so that's good. So the floor is yours. Do introduce yourself and carry on.
Thank you very much, Neil, and thank you, Samantha.
Oh, God. Oh, dear.
Please listen to your slides straight away. So I'm Philip Mayer, and I'm from the University of Cambridge, coming here today to talk in my role as program manager of the Centre for Doctoral Training. So this is a Centre for Doctoral Training in Sensor Technologies, and it's in its newest inception from 2019. It got this tag on for a healthy and sustainable future. So these centers for doctoral training are funded by research councils. Ours is funded by the Engineering and Physical Sciences Research Council. And they are intended to be interdisciplinary in their design. And I think, I know Elena Gara is an expert in sensors. And as you can see, her institute is also quite diverse in the disciplines it covers. So I think it's quite reflective. And maybe if you want to imagine the CDT, the sensor CDT is a very miniature version of the institute that Elena heads. So when I came in about 2.5 years ago, I was tasked with bringing in somewhere a broader view on how sensors can impact on society. And what was brought in by the directors was the Sustainable Development Goals. And you can see here on the slide the wheel of the Sustainable Development Goals and its colors reflected in our logo. And I thought the goals themselves, there are 17 goals developed by the United Nations over long discussions of what the global society should do next to tackle global challenges and resolve them. And what you see on the left is sort of the image that came out of it, shows this kind of tabular arrangement of individual goals. What people would typically do is, oh, I'm doing research on some health topic, and then they justify or say in a talk, oh, I'm addressing health, goal number 3, which is the goal of Sustainable Development Goal on health. But it kind of re-emphasizes siloed and boxed thinking. What the original intention was, I think, if you read the UN documents, is to look at them as an undividable, united, integrated unit. So you cannot work on health without paying attention to the rest, because you might make progress on some disease, but you produce so much plastic waste that you destroy the environment. So if you imagine a virtual sum, we don't make actual progress as a society in resolving challenges. So on the right, you can see sort of a cake image, which maybe resembles Heather's image of the transdisciplinarity, where we think of all the goals as connected. And here they are mapped on the triple bottom line, so the economy, society, and the environment. So rather than addressing just one issue, we try to encourage students to look at all issues in an integrated fashion. And if we go to the next slide, the CDT is a program that runs for 4 years, and students come in from many different subject backgrounds in the natural sciences and engineering. So what we usually try to achieve is that at the beginning, they are the salad. They think of themselves as a multidisciplinary group, and they often start being out suspicious of each other, as you typically find an engineer being slightly suspicious of a biologist and the other way around. And we hope to change that. And so they hopefully get onto the trajectory to become interdisciplinary researchers and ideally transdisciplinary researchers if we do a good job. So what I want to talk overall is how you grow and maintain sort of a group, in this case of students, who can work together and achieve these kind of work together to achieve a transdisciplinary research project. So in the first year, we have the chance to level them. So there's a master's year that they will graduate from a master's of research in the first year. They're successful, they can continue on to a PhD project. And so in the first year, we want them to work together. And basically, I put it as learning the language of other disciplines, because often it's almost as if someone speaks Italian and the other person speaks Hindi, and they just don't understand each other. So we try to remove these barriers. And one example that I will pull out of our program is the team challenge, which is on the next slide. So in the team challenge, the whole cohort of a given year needs to work together to solve a problem. So that might be between 10 and 15 students, which is a big group to do a group project. And on top of that, they come from different disciplines. So we have computer scientists, engineers, molecular biologists, physicists, the whole spectrum. One student had studied psychology, another one natural sciences and public policy. What they get is a very broad problem statement. And the example project I would talk about got a problem statement of air pollution is an issue. Citizen science looks interesting. Do something in this space. I'll explain a bit. What they got on top of that is £5,000, which they were completely responsible for themselves, and 3 months' time where they had almost nothing else to do in respect to the training program. So they have to propose a project, a solution to the issue, plan it, deploy and develop a plan, justify the plan to us, and deliver it over the 3 months. And at the end shows how far they got. Usually they don't get as far as they would like to, but it's a very short project to do a very ambitious kinds of research. They make all the decisions. And it's quite interesting to observe this as someone facilitating the project, because they don't trust us as people running a degree program that they have free reign, that they can make the decisions. They will ask, can I really buy this? And we will just say, I don't know, it's your money, is it worth buying? As long as you don't break the Research Council's purchasing rules, we should be fine. And over 3-4 weeks, they develop this confidence, and then they come to you and say, in a progress meeting, we decided to buy this and do this for this reason. And that's really good to see. And they sort of gel together as a unit. So if we go to the next slide, The example project I want to talk about is OpenSeneca. This started in 2017, so before I was in my role, but I had the privilege to accompany and guide this project in the last 2.5 years because it still exists. So this started locally in Cambridge, where there's lots of cyclists because public transport with buses is not so good. So the students decided that it might be interesting for people to know how good the air is on their cycling route to work. So they designed a sensor that you can just mount on your bike. And as you cycle through Cambridge, it measures particulate matter in the air. And you can then see, as a participant in this project, whether your commute is good, medium, or bad, the way you take to get to your workplace to healthier air. But what it allowed them to do is combine all the data and build up an air pollution map of Cambridge. And this is often a challenge because cities and sometimes even entire countries have very few big, very expensive air quality measurement stations. So you don't get coverage of an area to understand how it works. Now, this could have been a typical master's project that runs for 3 months. And at the end, they write a report, go home, done, and they go into do their PhD projects. But I think a little bit of magic happened in this specific project because they met with now a partner of the CDT. This is Dr. Lara Allen from the Center for Global Equality, and took this project to the next level. So if you go to the next slide, they were introduced by Lara to people interested in air quality at the University of Nairobi. So the students applied for some funding, got the funding, traveled to Nairobi and built together with local engineers, local researchers, and also working with participants, sensors that were appropriate for the context of Nairobi, where air quality is a much bigger problem than in Cambridge. So that project kind of developed a life of its own and is now self-sustaining. And meanwhile, the students have gone on to build this out into a more global project. So by now they have 5 citizen science projects in Latin America, 2 in Africa, 2 in Asia, and 4 in Europe, including Cambridge. And all of this is possible through a partnership with the Center for Global Equality. And this brought in a whole new host of challenges in teaching students how to work in this way, how to do participatory research. A whole new skill set is required. And I think we see a very good example in a later talk of this kind of project and the amount of work that goes into just making sure the solution you build is the right solution. So what we started to do is we actually developed a new module with Lara from the Center for Global Equality to teach our STEM students some social science methodologies so that enhances the research projects to make this kind of project more likely to happen in future again. We have some other projects. I do admit this is probably the most successful. If we go to the next slide. Neil mentioned the REF, so the Research Excellence Framework. So the project is all good, but can the Institute actually get tangible successes out of this? And in this case, it's a resounding yes. So the first 2 projects were one in Nairobi and one in Buenos Aires. And in both cases, the students applied to GCRF funding and got it. There's no PI leading this. We literally had to put PI's names onto the 2 grants because students can't be principal investigators. But they did everything. They prepared the bid, they submitted the bid, they won the money based on the work they had done. And out of this, they got some recognition from within the university. They won an award. But this kind of established a ground on which they could continue going into competitions, winning money. So there is tangible success in terms of reportable funding that was gained, but also they've published recently a paper in environmental science communications together with the University of Nairobi, MIT, NASA, and the WHO. Now, these are people that don't easily or often come together on the same paper. And that happened only because the students used the connections and the network from their PhD work, because none of this is their PhD work, and brought them into this interdisciplinary bigger project that they basically do as a hobby, a very grand hobby that takes up time. And yes, they've developed partnerships with the United Nations Habitats, the United Nations Environmental Programme, and the United Nations Development Programme. The latest project is in Phnom Penh, and it's also supported by the Ministry of the Environment and UNDP. So this is an example for me when you give students, talented students, the chance to do something and you really trust them to deliver on it, and they trust you that you have their backs in case something goes wrong. They will surprise you. They will surprise you with the things they can do. Next slide, please. I owe it to them to introduce them. This is a 6-people team. So the original group was, I think, around 12 students, and only half of them wanted to continue doing the project. That was fine. And those 6 are Lorena, Raphael, Sebastian, Peter, Christoph, and Charles. And just to give you an idea what they do for their actual PhD project. So Lorena is an engineer. She works on making devices for point-of-care diagnostics. So it's about printing papers with enzymes embedded in them. Raphael works on microfluidics, sizing of proteins, also for diagnostics. Sebastian just published work on using a smartphone screen to detect water pollution. So you can put a drop of your water on a smartphone screen, and it's programmed such that it can detect at least some ionic solutions, different ionic concentrations indicative of pollution or not. Peter looks into the skies. He studies exoplanets. Christoph is on the other end of the scale, looking at nanoparticles for vaccine delivery. And Charles works in super resolution microscopy. So they're all scientists, engineers, but they came together working on an environmental project, none of them knowing anything about the science of the atmosphere. But they brought that in through many conversations and partnering with other people, having a passion and being able to provide the sensors to measure things. Of course, you have to sort of manage expectations of a lot of people as a person, as me running the program, because they dedicate a lot of time to this. So the PhD supervisors need to be managed under quotation marks, but also the students need to be reminded of the fact that they will be evaluated at the end based on the PhD work. Now with this group, it hasn't been a problem. They've all made excellent progress in their PhDs, but that can be a challenge sometimes when the supervisors are not necessarily on board with their student doing big side projects. Thanks, Omar, for the, for the annotation. Next slide, please. So that brings me sort of to practical challenges, and I look at the practical challenges from the perspective of someone running a degree program. So I mentioned the first year of the program where the students come into from very different backgrounds, and we want them to learn to work together. So one thing they are encouraged to do is we have 4 elective modules. They're encouraged to take at least one that's outside their core expertise. So we have an engineer who goes into doing a master's level module in molecular biology. And why do we do that? Because we think that's sort of the only way of bringing that engineer to the cutting edge discussion that happens in molecular biology, in some area at least. Because if you send them into undergraduate module introduction on how the cell works, that doesn't help them talking to the researcher in biology who is doing really advanced research. The challenge in that is they have to pass the exam at the end, which is designed for biologists who've been studying it for 4 years at least. So there is challenges because they might marginally fail that exam and they may be used to achieving very highly. So again, it's about managing the expectations of the students. They may not do so well in this module, but that they will benefit largely from having done this down the line. And it's sort of sometimes fighting a bit with the institution that says, that doesn't make sense that you send someone from this department to that department. And we say, yes, it does make sense. You just need to look a bit further ahead than the 1 year of master's. Another point is how can we recognize the academic work that, for example, the OpenSeneca team has been done? They've published scientific papers on what they've been doing, how can we sort of begin to include this into actually recognizing this as academic qualified work that can count towards their PhDs rather than being a glorified side project. That is really, that they're really passionate about, that they're doing really well, but it's also very team focused. So again, it's not sort of a collaborative project where A has done these things, B has done these things, and we can easily allocate contributions. It's very, very integrated. So there's challenges to which I don't have obvious solutions in that as well. And then ultimately, they have to do the PhD exam. And typically, I would say, and I don't want to offend anyone, but a lot of PIs have grown up in silos. And then say you have two chemists examining a PhD project where a student has done engineering, molecular biology, chemistry, material science. And so you get suspicious examiners who don't believe that someone could have done that because it's not what's usually done. And they suspect that the student is overclaiming their own contribution to those aspects of the project. So that requires probably a longer cultural change in sort of what is acceptable to do, how much is a PhD a deep dive only, how much can it be cross-disciplinary, interdisciplinary, transdisciplinary. So there's a few barriers to overcome in that. But the approach we've taken internally in the Center CDT is just to be a bit courageous. Do first, apologize later, and try and sort out if we have caused any issues for the students in the way that we've actually delivered our program. And I think by the outputs that we're generating now based on what the program has been doing, I think the recognition comes that this is actually something that can be done sustainably and not just as a one-off project. That was my part. Thank you.
Philip, thank you very much for those comments on your experiences and the pioneering and creative work that you've been doing. It's absolutely fascinating. You know, for reminding us of that diversity, it doesn't just mean diversity in disciplinary terms, but ages and stages of career stages for researchers across, you know, across the piece. So that's really tremendous. Thank you very much. I think we're on good time and we can move on to the next session, which we're calling an interactive session. And I'm going to glance across the other side of the table because I sincerely hope that my dear colleague Elena can take over from this point.
Thank you, Neil, and thank you, Samantha, Heather, and Philip for the wonderful talks. We are going to have two opportunities to debate, the first one now and the second one towards the end of the program. And in preparation for or to guide the debate, I've prepared two questions that I hope are going to be meaningful, which we are going to be intending to discuss with the panel of speakers we have today, all six, the chair invited, and our two external speakers and other three Coventry University colleagues that have agreed to participate and share with us their knowledge and experience of TDR. But before I open the floor for the questions and the panel's contribution, and of course the audience's contributions to them, I really reflect on the attractiveness of TDR as a proposition to both researchers and institutions. And it's quite clear to me that there is so much there for everyone that all of us as researchers might be interested, would be interested in carrying out some form of transdisciplinary research. For institutions, it's fashionable, it's attractive, it's in tone and in line with the sponsors' strategies, with the sustainable development goals, and so many things around TDR seem to have come together recently to bring the topic to attention. And sometimes we forget that actually in in our circles, in our research groups, in our research endeavors, maybe we would have done TDR many years ago. Maybe would have not put a name to it, or maybe wouldn't have been quite so clear on the definitions of multidisciplinarity, interdisciplinarity, and transdisciplinarity as we are now, as we are today here upon the talks that we've had. So myself, I am an engineer. I am a professor of pervasive computing, nevertheless, and I lead a team of researchers that has 2 computer scientists, 1 political scientist, 1 sociologist in religion, and a few engineering students at the edges. So I think there are many teams like this in in our institution at Coventry, and some examples of TDR at Coventry have also come through the chat. And thank you, Ala, for your input, and Stephen for pointing out to pockets of excellence already existing at Coventry. So key topics for the conversation today and the interactive session and the closing debate are to do with practicing TDR. So if we are an early career researcher, or maybe a researcher that has focused primarily on fundamental work or fundamental discovery, specifically with the lens of their own discipline, in particular, what do we need to do? What would be the entry points to TDR if they are enthused by today or by watching the recording of this lively event? What would they need to do in order to enter TDR? What about partnerships? Is any partnership like any other partnership? Do we need to know or nurture partnerships of a particular kind, of particular kinds, in order to endeavor with practicing successfully TDR? How about the discipline impact? We hear so much about the impact. All of us that read a little bit around the ref and in between the lines of the next ref proposals, we know that impact is going to be growing in importance, and it is actually the very reason that we are here doing research and talking about how to do better research. So if we tackle the first question, TDR in practice, practicing TDR, I would be inviting our speakers first and foremost, and then of course the audience both to show their hand up, and hopefully Amalia and Emily can point the virtual microphone to the speaker, input in chat, and we'll collect the chat points for the closing debate. So floor is open, colleagues.
So I think
yes.
So I think in terms of entry points, the example I've given is a challenge project that we can frame within the masters. But there's other vehicles to do it. It's kind of small grant types of calls. There's been another one, the Global Challenges Research Fund at Cambridge has done these, where they've given, say, a certain amount of funding for smart imaging in low middle income countries. Already sounds like an interesting challenge. So what I think personally is important is giving people the trust to be able to do this, but also giving them some resource to be able to do this, because there's often not easy access to funds to do some crazy idea that people have.
I think from me, based on my experience as well as the experience of those whom I'm working with, it's very much around serendipity in terms of the having conversations with those whom you actually meet at a university to start different ways for exploring different ideas and talking about lots of different ideas that you can actually work on in the future. And I think that has really helped you or us to really develop our sort of views on how other disciplines can actually inform our own work. So I think I agree with what Heather was saying in terms of curiosity. So perhaps in terms of the development of researchers, as well as those who are practicing different disciplines, I think it is important to provide a space or a safe space for everyone to explore different ideas and test things out. And I believe that at the university, we do have prime funding sort of to encourage colleagues to actually explore different ideas. So perhaps if we can provide a safe space for development of researchers to be able to explore this in their own time, in their own way, I think that would encourage or improve the level of confidence in exploring different disciplines and how they can actually encourage people to partner in all sorts of different research ideas, I think.
Thank you, Philip. Thank you, Sylvester.
Can I add something?
Please.
Sorry, I'll just lower my hand. I think when Philip was talking about funding, I think there are, I talked about, and Heather talked about the funding that we'd offered at Leeds. I have to be honest, sometimes I look at the big GCRF projects and I know that a number of disciplines have come together under the umbrella of funding. And sometimes I have seen that so they all kind of come together, and then at the end of the project, each discipline goes back and remains untouched by the other disciplines. And I think it's really important, and very few PIs on these multi-million-pound projects do this, and I understand why, because the minute you get the money, you're supposed to have already started. But just spend some time on exploring the disciplines involved in the projects and where there could be overlap and how they sort of bleed into each other. So I think sometimes things can be labeled interdisciplinary, but actually they aren't actually. And I think what Sylvester was saying, the one thing that my experience tells me about working with academics that there's not enough of is time and space. And it's like, how do you create time and space for people to have these conversations, build up trusted relationships? I think it's really important when time is squeezed out of everything. So I think, like the Crucible program I talked at Leeds, that's the one thing I say to all the participants is, this is a gift. You've got 6 days over 6 months, and this is a gift of time and space to think about you and your research and where it could go and where it could go with others. And anyway, that's my short view on that.
Well, it's actually an enormously pertinent point that we are making there about the impact on the problem and the impact on the disciplines that contributed to the solution to the problem at the end of a project. And that's probably the right time when publications would come out of a funded project. What is the nature of those publications? What is the science in those publications? And how do we actually rate, underrate or overrate the transdisciplinarity in those publications or in the process that emerged those publications? And this is a problem connected also to one of the questions in the chat that Lorena put on managing the expectations of each of the individuals in the TDR team and those who are funding the team and those who are rating or scoring or starring the publications and the outcomes and outputs that come out of a TDR team. And I think there is an awful lot for us all as a global research community to do to better understand how to position the value of transdisciplinarity in general. But coming to the point of the difference between fundamental discovery in one's discipline and TDR research, is there any commentary there about the nature of the partnerships that need to be built to allow people who want to continue to do fundamental research in their discipline to still contribute in the context of a TDR partnership? I'm looking at Philip because I think you've tried to touch on some of these points towards the end of the talk.
Yes, so what I was thinking of in terms of bringing and then
think we've lost you, Philip. Maybe start again.
Did you
Saying about is that the relationship is not long enough. The collaboration is not sustainable enough. Sometimes the ability to keep sustainably doing this is limited. Now, our advantage was that we could build a partnership with the Center for Global Equality, co-teach, and actually be a science program with someone who has a social science background in ethnography in the African context, to keep working together. So I think that then continues to change the ways of thinking of people. So having these kind of, being able to build the structures that allow people to stay working together is also important. It's not always very easy. Yeah, another point, I've just seen some discussion about managing people. I just wanted to clarify when I was talking about managing expectations. I didn't mean managing people, but sort of, it's a silly project management term, making sure they know what the outcomes might be or might not be at the start of the project helps you prevent disillusionment and disappointment at the end of a project if people had too high expectations, for example. But we generally have very much a coaching approach in the sense of we allow students to go and do stuff.
Thank you, Philip. May I invite Sarah on the publications point, because it remains central to evaluation of success, I think, in many organizations and in many settings for TDR teams and TDR projects at the end of the day. Sarah?
Is that me, Sarah?
Yes, please, Sarah.
Okay.
There's only one Sarah.
Yes, no, it's just my experience of working across different disciplinary fields and working in transdisciplinary teams is that very often some really interesting outcomes, publications emerge from it, but actually trying to persuade journals that are very focused in one particular field to be open to what might be a mixed modes approach in terms of methodologies, in terms of different ways of data gathering and data analysis and so on, can be really limiting. And actually, coming myself from the arts field, it can be really off-putting, because sometimes the knowledge that we bring into these teams is rather diminished by the expectations and requirements of particular journals. So it's just something that I've noticed, and I think we need to make some interventions in that space. I mean, I'm also have been a journal editor, as many of us are, so in a way we need to take some responsibility ourselves. But I do think that that's an area that transdisciplinarity needs to make some inroads if we're going to be able to share and disseminate this kind of research in an effective way.
Thank you, Sarah. This drives us gently into the second topic that I feel may be worth discussing, and I'm sure is going to be continued in the closing debate, leadership and the role of institutions. And some of those institutions are the institutions that employ researchers, some of them are the institutions that support publishing and evaluation of research, of course. And much of what has been said so far in the program refer to shared cultures and supporting shared cultures, resourcing TDR, and maybe less has been said about the measuring of the success internally or externally facing within or without the teams that perform that research, or the researcher rewards and the communications that need to be had within institutions in order to enable TDR. So maybe some thoughts now and some ideas that can be brewed over during the next two presentations towards the closing debate on the role of institutions in enabling successful TDR and practical approaches. We've heard from Samantha through the nature of her position and the work that she does, that Leeds is pioneering a very strong managed strategic approach to TDR. We heard from Philip of what the institution is doing to ensure sustainability in the CDT approach to TDR. But are there any other ideas and pointers to the creation of shared cultures, measuring success and researcher reward. Welcome participation from the floor, from the speakers.
I think Heather was saying something, but on mute.
I wasn't, but what I was actually going to do is sort of almost throw it back at Elena and Neil, because I'm sure you've had some thoughts on this topic that you might be willing to share.
Well, the point is, Heather, that both Elena and I are doing this purely from a very selfish point of view of this event today, because what we're struggling with really is where we strike the right balance between. I think I've seen a number of comments in the chat about allowing time, space, and so forth to be a fertile ground for the development of ideas and conversations and so forth. A balance between that on the one hand and the kind of structures and processes and bureaucracy which universities inevitably tend to develop. We are, as I said, developing a new research structure for the university as a whole. So we're very keen to know how and where we can strike that particular balance, and how we can. I mean, the crucial thing will be, in a sense, that we, it's what we're delivering in terms of interesting project ideas that we're putting out there and hopefully winning.
Okay.
Yeah, I think my thoughts are based on what I've seen and based on how the projects that I've been involved in have evolved, through the many years that we have done the work within the context of playful learning and game-based learning at university and beyond. I think it's very much around shared interest. What are the actual interests of the researchers? Whether they are extrinsic or intrinsic interest that they have, because many researchers are driven by different interests and different things that they would want to see happen in terms of their development or in terms of recognition, acknowledgement, perhaps. And some researchers are very much interested in the impact of their own research and how that would actually be adapted in so many different communities beyond academia. So I think there could be an opportunity for us to have conversations with researchers to understand more about where their interest lies. I think, and I think I'm quite lucky to have engaged and are engaging with colleagues across the universities who are very much interested in play and games and whatnot. So those are the intrinsic motivation that brought everyone together from different disciplines. So perhaps if we can find some sort of a shared interest that we can start from, that could actually help people to develop a community that might be able to drive different new ideas at the university, I think. Yeah.
Thank you, Sylvester. Samantha?
I was going to make a comment about structures, and I think it's actually not that difficult to bring people together to develop new ideas. What we struggle with at Leeds, and apologies for being recorded, but is actually not this bit of it. It's when it gets down to the nitty-gritty of the finance and the HR. So when you're trying to employ a postdoctoral researcher across two areas, that's actually, this stuff is very doable. It's the other parts that don't sort of fall into line. And I think I was just looking at what Stephen had written in the chat. The other thing I wanted to say was, when we're talking about disciplines, I think it's also sectors, and you've got such a strong sector that's non-academic in terms of industry. I think when we're talking about interdisciplinarity, we should also think about the value that the sectors can bring into these conversations as well.
Thank you, Samantha, and thank you for opening up on the PDRAs. We've just navigated the muddy waters of dual belonging and mentorship and management of PDRAs unsuccessfully last year, but hopefully with a little bit more success in the year to come. And let it be that we are all in the same boat, trying to understand how to resource TDR work in fixed and inflexible HR structures. I'm going to thank all colleagues for their input to the two key topics, and keep feeding things in the chat. We are going to continue the same conversations, inviting more colleagues from the audience to participate as they wish in the closing remarks when we have another 20 minutes or so to finalize the debate. And thank you, Neil, for the session.
Thank you very much, Elena. So we will now have two examples. I said at the outset that we have always done transdisciplinary research, but now we want to give it a much greater emphasis. So what we have now are examples of where we have been doing it, and certainly in this, the first example, the project started well before we restructured research. So I'm very, very grateful to my colleagues concerned, and we will hear first from Narinder on the project Matura Life. So over to you, Narinder.
Okay, thank you, Neil. So just moving on to the slides, if I could. Yeah. Yeah, so just very quickly, I'm Narinder Baines. I'm the project manager within the Functional Materials Group, which is also within the Clean Growth and Future Mobility Centre at Coventry University. I've been with that team for just over 8 years. Before that, I was in industry for over 18 years as a process chemistry scientist and a business development manager for different organisations within industry. The project itself, Mature Life, stands for the metallisation of textiles to make urban living for older people more independent and fashionable. And we believe this is a good example and success story of transdisciplinary research. So the next slide, please. The project was initially a 3-year project, which was extended by 5 months due to COVID reasons. It started in 2018 and it completed in May 2021. It was a collaborative project which involved various disciplines across academia, NGOs, technology development, SMEs in manufacturing and R&D companies. And the split of those companies were across 9 countries across Europe. Coventry University were the coordinating partner, but we also had 2 discipline teams within our groups that were working on this project, functional materials and art and design. We had a university in Slovenia that worked on coatings, and a life cycle assessment specialist at the university in Poland. We had NGOs that looked at aged care and age-related concerns. We had technology developers and RTOs in footwear technology, textiles and fabrics, and Internet of Things and big data platforms. And then we had a variety of design and manufacturing SMEs that were involved in the project, printed electronics, nanoparticle development and sensing technologies. Next slide, please. So the project goals were to address an aging population and increasing demand for care, and increasing in independence, enabling people to age in place, to reduce stigma and abandonment rates associated with assistive technologies, and to be able to embed assistive functionality discreetly within assistive devices and wearables, produce e-textiles that were based on novel selective metallization techniques for textiles, to develop smart furniture, clothing and footwear that would be usable with an ease of use and designed for desirability. Next slide, please. The project involves 7 technical work packages, starting with end user and stakeholder engagement that involved workshops looking at co-creation of ideas, usability, benefits, and design. And then we had materials development work packages that involved the development of the functional material, catalysts, metallization processes, electrical connectivity, development of the prototypes, assembly and upscaling of the technology, and all that was done quite ambitiously in a 3 to 3.5 year project. Next slide, please. So just to go a little bit deeper into the main streams of work. So we had design development, which was everything from the co-creation of the ideas for these technologies to developing the concept prototypes. So if we can get to the next slide and to go in a little bit more detail. The design development was informed by establishing co-creation workshops, and we had exploratory workshops that looked at the needs of older people across various countries. So we had workshops in Spain, Italy, Belgium, and the UK. We looked at clothing, footwear, and furniture. And then we took that further in terms of those ideas to then looking at concept development, where we expanded the regions that we held workshops to further develop those concepts for clothing, footwear, and furniture. So we had 10 workshops in total across 9 countries. We had 94 participants, 8 to 11 participants per workshop. If you look at the split of male and female participants, we had 93 female and 31 male across those workshops. And the age group that were involved in those range from 60 to 95. So very much focused on the needs of older people. And they were facilitated by project team members. Next slide, please. And this is a few examples of workshops that were held across Europe, where older people were informing what the requirements were, but also specialists in those areas as well. So there were specialist academics and researchers that were working in this area that were informing the requirements based on their knowledge, their personal experiences. And then we were looking to translate that information into something that would be of useful design that met the end user's needs, and something that was usable and also fashionable, that wouldn't stigmatize the people that were going to use those products. Next slide, please. So we were building on, in terms of the co-development, post co-creation, we were looking at building upon the concepts, developing design briefs and user requirements for those products, developing product design specifications that related to the experiences of the people that inform them. We had a formation of a multidisciplinary design team that involved collaborative partners, but also external partners that were focusing on those 3 key prototype areas, which were clothing, footwear, and furniture. And this involved various disciplines, as I mentioned: design, psychology, manufacturing, engineering, material science, electroplating experts, and data scientists. Next slide, please. So a little bit more on the area that we focused on in our functional materials group team here at Coventry, which was materials development, and that was selective metallization, where we worked from lab scale up through to pilot scale development of that technology in this project. We were working on electroless plating, and the material life e-textiles were created using electroless copper plating, which is a specialist area within our own group. And the reason being that there were specific benefits of using electroless plating. The fibers within the textiles were coated with copper, ideally around their full surface area. You can see from the SEM image, fibers that are fully coated with electroless copper. The color is slightly artificial, but it gives a good representation of what it would look like. The electroless plating would enable a multifunctional material being created, and a fabric that would have a structural textile property and electrical circuit properties together. There's no metal wiring, no direct printing of silver, so it was copper that we were using, and yet the textile would maintain feel and drape of a textile, and it would remain flexible and bendable. Next slide, please. And here's just an example of a material that was printed and plated. Electroless copper requires a catalyst to initiate the copper deposition. So we developed a stable printable catalytic ink that used copper nanoparticles as its base. That ink printed well with good resolution by the end of the project. It had good conductivity properties after plating, and it enabled the technology for the metallization of textiles selectively. And there's an example there of catalyst being printed and electroless plating of that afterwards. Next slide. So then once we had the technology developed at lab scale, we were looking to upscale that to a semi-production scale of printing, plating, e-textiles. So there's examples there where the stable catalyst was printed at Printed Electronics Limited, which is a UK-based SME based near Tamworth, that were printing the circuitry onto the fabrics that we use for footwear, furniture, and clothing. And those catalytically printed fabrics were then transported to a plating facility in France, Bertin-Aubert. Sorry, could I just go back? And those circuitries would form the insoles in footwear, the sensors on furniture, and heating elements on clothing. Next slide, please. So after the elements of design, concepts, and materials had been developed, we had to bring that all together into the prototypes themselves. So it had to be integrated so that it was electrically functional, and it was of a form that could be used. So I'll just talk a little bit about that now. The next slide. So here we have the sort of flow of how we got from the co-creation stage of developing the designs for footwear, what the requirements were in terms of developing the insole, which would have pressure sensors to help us understand the gait and balance, because one of the key concerns in the co-creation groups was older people concerned about falling. So understanding and informing on balance and gait was important to be to be able to have that as a functionality within the footwear technology. So this is what we worked on. This is what we designed. This is what we developed in terms of the fabric that was functionalized and then tested, as you can see in the bottom right-hand corner, where the sensors are being tested using the communications, the IoT data platform and apps to inform the users of the information that has been collected from those devices. Next slide. And similarly with the furniture, it was identified that we wanted to inform the users of their sleeping patterns and their posture, and to be able to tell them when they need to sit, stand and move and exercise and get around and not oversleep on sofas and chairs. So we built in sensors that would allow us to understand and inform on posture and their breathing patterns in terms of if they've been oversleeping, then it's time for them to get up and be active. And these are the prototypes that you can see there, the circuitry and sensor arrays that were developed and put together and tested within the project. Next slide, please. And again, in a similar sort of fashion, clothing was developed from its concept stage to look at thermal comfort, so being able to keep our users warm. So we developed heating elements that were embedded with flexibility onto the clothing items that could be switched on and off as they required. Okay, next slide. And all of that in terms of circuitry, in terms of sensors and components, you need a communication tool. And we had a big data platform, IoT platform that collected data from those devices through wireless connectivity. And that then communicated with mobile devices that the users and carers could operate and be alerted of if there were any incidents or a need for any assistance. Okay, next slide. Okay, so in terms of important, we've talked about publications earlier on and the need for that. So just on the next slide, I'll just give you an indication of some of the publications that we've been doing as part of the project. So in terms of published peer-reviewed journals, there was a total of 11 that were done from this project, and there's 7 in preparation at the time of writing this presentation. 6 peer-reviewed conference papers and 1 book chapter on design. And you can see there in terms of disciplines, in terms of science, design, technology development and life cycle assessment, all different disciplines were producing publications in these areas. We did receive a design award for this project, and GEDS received that. And we also applied for the STEM Project of the Year, but I haven't heard anything on that yet. So I think that is about my last slide on the project. Thank you for your attention. I hope that gives you a good flavour for interdisciplinary work within a multidiscipline team across industry and academia. It was funded through the European Commission.
Thank you very much, Narinder. Yes, it was an absolutely great project, fine example. Thank you very much. I'll hand over straight away to Sylvester. And Sylvester, if I could ask you to, I know that you can talk forever and everything you say is fantastically interesting, but unfortunately we are up against the clock, so we do want to allow some time for discussion. So please try and keep it down.
Yes, definitely. I would try to keep it short and sweet. For those of you who have not met me before, I'm currently working on research within the context of game science, which refers to the investigation into playful learning, game-based learning, serious games, gamification, whatever name that you want to refer to when it comes to the use of play and games in teaching and learning in serious context, for example, health, so on and so forth. So what I'm going to talk about today is very much around the work that we are doing within the ESSES project. If we can go to the next slide. So just to give you a bit of a context in terms of why we are doing this and why we want to investigate playful methodologies, playful education, playful pedagogies, and how they can impact human development. So in this case, in terms is funded under the Global Challenge Research Fund. We started last year and during the pandemic, and it was quite uninteresting. It was a bit of a challenge, as well as it has provided a lot of opportunities for us to address the topic of resilience and how we can be resilient in our practice as well as in the development of young people, as well as those who are within the community. So if you go to the next slide. So what I'm going to talk about in terms of TDR is in terms of how do we cascade change and impact. So when we talk about creating a space that will encourage people to explore different ideas, especially in terms of the use of play and games in all sorts of different areas. Game Changers that we set up in 2015, where we work with colleagues and students across the university within the context of research-enriched learning and research-enriched teaching. So we learn from each other in terms of the different types of disciplines that can actually inform the way that we develop or create experiences that is going to be meaningful towards addressing all sorts of different challenges and also responding to opportunities. And we have also engaged with various experts internationally from different disciplines. So this has provided a space for us to really explore TDR in terms of not only research, but in terms of practice as well. How can we practice transdisciplinary sort of findings and outcomes and outputs in terms of impacting the various communities around the world in so many different contexts as well. Can we go next? So what we have done in terms of the foundation of the work that we have done within this particular research has informed two sister initiatives. One was Beaconing, which was a project which was funded by the EU Commission, and we engaged with 14 other partners within Europe as well as Turkey. We engaged with SMEs, those who are in educational technology, those who are in the game industry, and those who are in all sorts of different other industries, for example, sensors, so on and so forth. And we engage with training institutions as well, where we are trying to see how we can actually work together and create something that is going to be beneficial for the target audience, where we engage with 6,000 teachers and students across Europe, and also implementing some of the approaches which we have piloted with our colleagues at the university here in Coventry and implemented it in Malaysia, where Game Changers has been adapted and adopted. And we have worked with teachers in very remote parts of Malaysia in trying to encourage them to see how they can discover different ways for teaching and learning. And we included all sorts of different inspirations from different disciplines that has allowed us to really explore a more empathic way for creating experiences. Go to the next one. And can we go to the next one, please? What we have done within Beaconing and Creative Culture has informed further funding into engaging more educators in Malaysia. For example, Creative Culture 4.0, where we are currently engaging with more than 400 teachers in terms of the training, in terms of engaging them with all sorts of different topics, which also includes systems literacy, which has been mentioned in the chat. And also ACES, which is now trying to see what have we learned so far from 2015 and how can we actually implement something that's going to be beneficial for the different stakeholders in Malaysia, in Vietnam, and in Indonesia. And quite interestingly, that this project was approved before the pandemic, and we have to respond to the challenges associated to that. So that has required a lot of in terms of work across the different communities remotely, and what we learn from partners in terms of their their engagement through online means, and those are the things which we are learning at the moment in terms of how can we create a more resilient practice. So this is an example of how we can cascade change and impact in terms of the TDR environment that we created in the beginning that's informed so many different work that we are doing around the world. Can we go to the next slide? So the drivers and enablers from our experience is very much around the interconnection between research, development, and practice, which is important because it's important for us to implement and test different methods we are using in the TDR space that we have created, and how this has also been aligned with the Sustainable Development Goals, and we have heard a lot of different discussions around that today. Next. So in terms of how do we enable this, in terms of how do we engage with targeted relationships and partnerships, or perhaps serendipitous sort of engagement with different partners who are actually interested in the same sort of impact that we want to achieve in the communities. So in terms of challenge-led, what are the foresights, the timeliness of the approach, or the impact that we want to achieve, and also taking inspirations from existing work, because it is important for us to be more iterative and incremental in the way that we do things, learning from each other, learning from best practices, and also perhaps quote-unquote failures in terms of some of the stuff that we are doing. So this is aligning with a playful approach into how we learn from productive failure, which will inform different ways for us to tackle different challenges out there, and also thinking about sustainability and diversification. So thinking about how can my approach or my research or the TDR space that we have created, would that impact other communities within a different context? So those are the different things that we always think about in terms of the drivers and the enablers. Next slide. So within the context of ACES, so we think about the challenge and the timeliness in terms of the Sustainable Development Goals. Can we click on the next one? Can we click on the next? Yeah. So in terms of the different challenge or impact that we want to achieve. So for example, here it's like the 4 SDGs which have informed our interest in the different challenges we want to address within education, resilience, as well as the different approaches for upskilling educators in the 3 countries in Asia. Next. So in terms of trying to learn from existing inspirations, so here from Game Changers, which has won an award in education and learning 2019, from creative culture, and also from social values, which has been sort of research within the university, and how can we include all these different inspirations and insights into addressing the challenge that we have identified. Next. And also this has informed the different types of engagement that we have, not only with external partners, for example, here with 3 universities in Malaysia, Vietnam, and Indonesia, which have also informed our interaction with different NGOs, technology hubs, government units, for example, the Ministry of Education, so on and so forth. And also importantly, within the university, we demonstrated that we actually work with one another, ensuring that we understand what are the different expertise that we have in-house. How can we come together and create something or develop something that is going to be impactful? So the impact here, the challenge, has really influence the decisions that we made. Next slide. So here, just to give you an example of what we are currently working on in terms of trying to understand the connection between playfulness. Is there a direct connection with how resilience is being developed? So we are learning a lot from the pedagogical point of view, from the technological point of view, in terms of social point of view, and in terms of so many different perspectives from different experts, as well as those who are on the ground and those who are in the community. We are working with the head of the communities. We are working with parents. We are working with volunteers. So it's quite an interesting project where we allow the community to come together and engage in meaning making. So this is part of the participatory action research that we include as part of the project itself, to encourage more TDR space to be created within a partner organization to help them to engage with one another. Yeah. So let's go to the last slide. Probably if you can just skip this one. Yeah, just skip it and then go to the last slide. So what we intend to create is the last slide. Yeah. So what we intend to create are these 3 different elements which will require transdisciplinary knowledge and insights in terms of how do we adapt the different models that we have created within this particular project. Most importantly, practice recommendations in terms of those who want to adapt it and adopt it from different disciplines, as well in terms of policy. So this is our aspiration within the project. So I think hopefully that that has really described some of the stuff that we are doing within this particular context, and how important it is to provide and create a space that will allow TDR to happen naturally. So yeah, so that's it from me. Short and sweet.
Yeah, fantastic, Sylvester. Thank you very, very much for describing the such a multifaceted and engaged project, describing it very succinctly. Thank you tremendously. Now we have a reasonable amount of time for discussion, and we are going to try and, or we have been trying to monitor the chat, and Elena is going to try and introduce some speakers, I think.
Absolutely, absolutely. So quite a few frequent words that or topics that came through the chat are around time for research that is different than one in the comfort of one's discipline, risk-taking, creating win-win situations, democratizing TDR, the need for change of mind and heart of what is acceptable as data and methodologies, coming from single discipline reviewers and peer reviewers, the need for avenues for publishing well, transdisciplinary research. These are the few themes that have been conversed over the chat. But I would like to, I very much like to invite Sarah to make a few of the points that she began to speak of during the chat, and then Stephen maybe on system thinking and associated issues that he had been writing about. So Sarah first.
Thanks, Elena. Yes, it was just a comment that I made, and I think time is underpinning so much of what we've been talking about, and time that is useful and productive time. And I think we've all been in those experiences where we've been sort of put in a room and told to come up with the idea, and nothing really happens. And I was just reflecting on the fact that many of us have been fortunate to have funded network projects, and many of us have put in what we think are very strong projects and not been funded, but a huge investment often goes into those developments, and it brings people together. And the whole point of a network project is it doesn't have sort of tangible things to produce. It's about time and space for exploring ideas, for looking at crossovers, for developing much bigger ideas. And it it was just a thought that I had, that if all of that investment we've made into the time for bringing people together, to dreaming up ways in which we can work across discipline, could be supported, because I think we're all aware that we're trying all the time to find new ways to generate income. And sometimes that takes away from the time that is needed for ideas to grow and develop, very much bottom up, as it were, and to allow for those different perspectives, different knowledge bases, to come together and find collision points, and then find ways through where you do get to a new understanding and a new place to be. And so it was just a sort of plea, I suppose, that whether or not we can as a university resource that rather extended period of time that we need, rather than a sort of one-off moment where we're all shut in a room and told to get on with it. And maybe Scott can jump in here, because I know you've got a good experience of something that has come out of work also with Elena as well, I know, with colleagues, which has been a good example of how something's had chance to sort of percolate a little bit.
Yes, please, Scott.
Yes, okay. Well, there are a couple of things. Thank you, Sarah and Elena. I mean, several months ago, there was an opportunity put in a Leverhulme Center bid, and Marcos Kaufman from the Advanced Manufacturing Center had pulled together some people into a network, and including the humanities in that context, because the focus was on people-centered productivity. And with the person at the center, it seemed to make sense to bring in people from this other from the humanities area. And that's one thing I might just comment. There's quite a lot of STEM that we've seen in the presentations here, and that there is that STEAM discussion that we need to also engage with, I think. But I agree with Sarah that, and what I would just say, just because I know there's not a lot of time, is that investment, if we could have that kind of investment, the conversations are continuing, even though the center bid didn't make it through to the next round. And some of the colleagues are here in the talk. Is that Sarah's talking about networks that some of us set up outside the university, using network grants to set up between different institutions and countries. But we have the opportunity now within Coventry with the institute structure, and I think Stephen's alluded to some of this, that to bring together networks here, and that we do need the support to do that. Whether it's a Crucible-like structure, I'm not sure. The Samantha's ideas are really good, but I think that we do have a lot of experience with building networks and coordinating them in such a way that they sort of produce results over time, and that time is essential. So if we could just be thinking about getting that kind of support inside Coventry, then it would allow us, Elena and myself and others who are working towards something that we can see on the horizon, shimmering before us as something we could be working toward, but we just really need the opportunity to get there. So I think I'll stop with that. Thank you.
Thank you, Sarah. Thank you, Scott. I'm absolutely right behind the proposition of time and space, but I would just add to that the space and the time that we need is not just for generating those brilliant ideas that will bring uncountable success, but also space to fail safe. Because we need to remember that, particularly in the TDR space, we need to generate many ideas before we come across the one that is really, really going to fly, with all of the team engaged and with real, true impact in the future. So thank you for those remarks, and Stephen, I'm very happy to go and hear of your thoughts on system thinking.
Yeah, thank you, Elena. Thanks for the opportunity to speak. I picked up on Scott's comment about refocusing on STEAM. So just a quick plug for our event Robot Day, which is coming up in May next year as part of City of Culture, where we're very much focused on STEAM, and anybody who'd like to get involved, that's going to be one of Coventry's major contributions to the City of Culture year. Be very happy to have that conversation. So yes, systems thinking. There's a number of people commenting on this in the chat, and I think it's really important. So Kian, I'm not sure how to pronounce your name. Apologies if I've pronounced that right. But she spoke of the need to have a prepared mind in order to take advantage of unexpected events and create that serendipity that brings about TDR projects. Now, one of the ways of developing that type of prepared mind is systems thinking. Systems thinking's fairly well developed discipline in its own right, and it's about having that mindset to be able to see the big picture and understand where what you are doing fits in, but also to have the honesty, I guess, to understand where what you're not doing is impacting on other people. So there was another comment about, we need the time and people are taking conscious decisions to focus on their work and get their work done. But that has a ripple effect on what other people are doing, and the lack of opportunity to create the TDR projects, in my view. So I think one of the really important things that could come out of this is some opportunities, perhaps through the Doctoral College or the research institutes, to develop that idea of systems thinking and give people the chance, maybe through workshops and some training, the opportunity to explore ideas and think beyond their own silos and think about, well, what's the effects of my decision making going to have on other people and on the overall output of the university, not just within my own group. So I think it would be very valuable for the bottom line of the university, not just for the quality of the research.
Thank you, Stephen. We have 5 more minutes if we need them for any final remarks from any of our speakers or anyone else in the audience pertaining to either the researcher uptake of TDR or the institutional duty to support TDR, responsibility to support TDR. Neil? Yes, Stephen.
So yeah, I mentioned in the chat as well, and you asked me potentially to speak about this, is the idea of a matrix structure. So this is, we had a CGFM, Clean Growth and Future Mobility meeting, where I raised this with Carl, but what struck me when I saw the proposed new structure, that it was still very siloed. So I'm a PhD researcher in system security, focusing on automotive. But to me, security is an example of a cross-cutting concern, as we call them in systems engineering. So other examples would be safety or usability or manufacturability in an engineering context. And these are things that we have pockets of excellence in all of our silos, and we need to create a way for those people who are working on those cross-cutting concerns within disciplines to communicate together and to be rewarded for doing that. And there needs to be some kind of reward structure for encouraging people to engage across transdisciplinary. So I don't know, I'm not a member of staff, but I doubt that there are KPIs for transdisciplinary engagement. To understand how many ideas you've put forward for research. So that might be another idea.
Not yet, Stephen, not yet.
So
Probably in the future, reward is welcome for any good research, and particularly TDR research, because that is likely to be much more impactful in general. At least that is my personal opinion, Chair. And to you.
Perhaps I should start to wrap things up, because I'm aware that we are approaching the end point of the proceedings. So the first thing to do is to thank all colleagues who have given time and space to preparing for today, particularly our external guests, Samantha and Philip. I'd like to thank our colleagues in Media and External Affairs for setting this up. A tremendous amount of preparation go to these sorts of events behind the scenes, and we're enormously grateful for colleagues for supporting us in that regard. I am aware that one or two people may have raised their hands in the course of the proceedings and wanted to ask a question. Apologies for missing you. You have an opportunity now, please, to put anything in the chat. We will be looking at the transcripts very carefully. I think it's been a very fruitful and creative afternoon. Lots of interesting ideas. Elena and I have a responsibility now to take away what's been said and what's been written, and to see how we can turn that into facilitating transdisciplinary research in a way which suits all of us, both those of us who are in senior management and those of us who are at the start of our research careers. So I think at that point, I will thank everybody. Just looking to Elena, if I missed anything.
No, really, just to add my thanks to your thanks to everyone.
That's great. Thanks very much. And for those of you who've joined us from outside the university community, a big thanks too. Hope you've learned a lot. We've all learned a lot here. Bye-bye now.
Thank you.